Hey, and how's it going on this Friday? It's April 10th on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. You can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, and come support us on Patreon. Today we're going to hear some coronavirus updates, also the coronavirus economic damage, problems with the US company Zoom, is 5G causing coronavirus, and transparency of this history. So how is everyone doing? We've gotten here to the very end of the week. I'm sure many of you are really happy to welcome the weekend. Well, some of us were at home all day, so every day is kind of like the weekend anyways, but I know that we want to enjoy this time together on the Morning Star Drive. So let's move first on to our featured artist of the day. And the featured artist is none other than the Sumney Boys featuring Emma. And they're both from the US. And the song they're going to be singing is Sail. Second song is going to be from Japan. It is Kuma-chan, and he's going to sing the song Takara. So let's just sit back, relax, and enjoy the music.
I'm just sailing, I'm just sailing. You cannot stop me, you cannot stop me. I'm just flying, I'm just flying. I'm just soaring, I'm just soaring. I just said I'm sailing, sailing high, sailing high, sailing high, sailing high. I'm just sailing, I'm just sailing. You cannot stop me, you cannot stop me. Too late. The ocean wind is blowing on my face. Still I'm a set sail, ocean blue. My flag raised high with my crew, like yeah. What's with all the noise? They just mad cause they don't like my choice. They just mad cause they don't like my voice. Yeah, you can't judge my joy. They keep on giving me attitudes. They keep on changing up attitudes. Fly high like a hot balloon. I'ma sound like I'm Orlando Bloom. Enemies mocking me anyways, but I just beat them like every day. Battles are endless, no holidays. I could just win it like anyways. Like, tell me what I don't do. Tell me what I did say. Tell me what I don't do. Like, I'm just sailing, I'm just sailing. You cannot stop me. Cannot stop me. I'm just flying. I'm just flying. I'm just soaring. I'm just soaring. I just said I'm sailing. Sailing high. Sailing high. Sailing high. Sailing high. I'm just sailing. I'm just sailing. You cannot stop me. You cannot stop me.
But the Lord is my head, yeah, we on the same boat. They thinking I sink, but you know I just float. I'm fulfilling my dreams, never looking back, running like I'm Usain Bolt. You think the wind and waves of this world, they ever gonna stop me? While the fair was blowing up, seizing my chances, watch me. Riding that new wave, I live behind old waves. We just wave it, baby. They think we crazy, ain't we? But I'm taking action. They do a hassle, they just fractions. I'm working from Monday to Sunday, I'ma keep on flowing, no distractions.
I'm just sailing, I'm just sailing. You cannot stop me, you cannot stop me. I'm just flying, I'm just flying. I'm just soaring, I'm just soaring. I just said I'm sailing, sailing high, sailing high, sailing high, sailing high. I'm just sailing, I'm just sailing. You cannot stop me, you cannot stop me.
"自分の中の宝掘り出して新たな世界へ GO」
して
たせいそこから抜け出すための答えを与え僕たちを悟らせた前さあ前へ進んでサバイブリバイブする世界正解はそう一人一人がからしだねだね芽を出し育てたら収穫今こそ深く実践が書くどんな環境だとしても今できる最善を尽くそうさあふてくされてないで立ち上がろうそれが俺たちのフェイス Let's go 歴史を出してこうこの未来を開いてこう自分の中の宝掘り出して新たな世界へゴー何もしたくない日や辛い時だってあるだろうそんな時は思い出していつだって一緒だってことも Yes Yeah心の扉開けばほら見えてくるから KKR 得たから過去を映し出すバックミラー誰かが言ったそんなものはどこにもない夢に過ぎない現実見なさい OK ならもっと燃やそうぜ意志超える壁は自分自身どんな環境だとしても今できる最善を尽くそうさあ下を向いてないで立ち上がろうLet's go! Step by step.
And that was Takara from Kumachang, and that first song we heard was Sail from the Somni Boys featuring Emma, all from the US, and Kumachang is from Japan. So that brings us over to coronavirus updates. Very simple, nice and easy. The numbers are getting so high that I don't really need to give very big exact numbers because they're just constantly changing all the time. But at the moment, in the world, there's about 1.53 million cases and 90,000 deaths, so most likely we'll be pushing towards 100,000 deaths probably by within the next 2 days. The US is constantly going up. They're at 435,000 cases with 15,000 deaths, which is now the same as Spain. Spain is also 15,000 deaths with 148,000 cases. And the biggest difference between the two is even though they have the same amount of deaths, the mortality rate is 3.4% in the US and 10% in Spain. Just to let you guys know, is they had their biggest day of deaths in the US, and it's about 2,000 people died in a day. So it's getting pretty, they say it's going to probably hit the peak this weekend. So we really need to pray, especially for New York over there. Italy is slowing down a lot. They're only at 139,000, and which means that Spain is almost 10,000 more cases, and they're at 18,000 deaths, and they're still pushing at a rate of around 13% mortality rate, which basically means that we learned before in several weeks back that Italy has a high rate because they have an extremely high amount of elderly people in the country. France is at 113,000, which is pretty crazy because now they're moving up really fast at 11,000 deaths. And the UK is even more serious with 61,000 cases and 7,000 deaths. And the one thing that's very interesting about the UK is they say that the UK was a little bit late in putting in their social distancing, and mainly because they actually didn't do any social distancing. They kind of wanted to do herd immunity in the beginning, and they kind of just let everyone out. It's kind of backfiring a bit, and their mortality rate is like 12%. So next from Italy is 13%, and they're slowing down. The UK is at 12%, so they're higher than Spain and France. Belgium is very interesting because I'm putting Belgium and the Netherlands because both of their they both have over 2,000 deaths, like 2,200 each, and they're only at like 23,000 cases, 21 to 23,000 cases, which means that both of them are kind of their death rate is at 10%, which is very high for this coronavirus. Experts say that the real like death rate for the coronavirus, just like in general, should be about 1% or maybe under 1%. So hitting at 10%, 12% is really high, which means that either they're not testing enough people, or maybe their response was just a little bit too late. That the wrong, basically what we studied in the very beginning was their medical system is just being too overwhelmed that people that don't need to die are dying. One country that's particularly very interesting is actually India. Now, India is like the second largest country in the world, and they're actually gaining really fast. They're already at 6,000 cases and 178 deaths, which means they're running at about 3%, which is really high if you think about it, because even when you look at the U.S., the U.S. was starting, like their death rate was starting at like 0.9, 0.8% in the beginning. And India is already at 3%. So we have to kind of keep our eyes on India to see how they're doing also. America is kind of bracing for the worst right now. Like I said, they had 2,000 deaths in a single day. And of course, New York is the hardest hit. And those of you guys don't know, New York, there's 50 states in America. New York is just one of them. And this one state that's hit the hardest, they have 151,000 cases in this one state, which basically means that they would be higher than Spain. Like they would actually be like, if you took USA out of it and just put New York, just the state of New York, 151,000 is still the highest in the world. If you took the US out, they'd be higher than Spain, Italy, France, UK, and they're already at 6,000 plus deaths. So it is pretty bad there, and the bulk of the deaths are happening, I believe like 75% almost of the deaths are happening in New York. But the good news is, even though like the deaths are constantly getting higher and higher, the one really, really good sign is that the hospitalization number, the rate is going down. So it means that in the future, and we're not sure, probably within like by next week, those numbers of deaths should actually be going down too. And we really gotta think about New York, because New York itself is at 5,000 plus deaths. And if you think about that, America only has 15,000, right? Which means 1/3 is coming from the city of New York, not even the state. The state of New York is 6,000 deaths. The city of New York, just one city inside this giant state, is 5,000 of the 6,000 deaths. And if you compare it to all of the U.S., that's basically 1/3 of all deaths are coming from a single city. So we are really grateful and thankful that things are slowing down, at least the rate of hospitalization. So we just we gotta keep an eye on them, because when we see their rates go down, we're gonna see the entire rate go down over the world. So I hope that you guys will really keep praying for this coronavirus to make sure that it steadily goes down. Now, one thing I want to talk about, a couple things I want to talk about today about the coronavirus. The first thing is I was looking into what's the economic damage, the world economic damage, okay, of the coronavirus. And they say so far, with seven of the largest stock markets, there is a loss of $4 trillion. All right, so that's with a T, it's not even a B. So far, the damage done by the coronavirus is $4 trillion in only 7 stock markets. And now we're closing in on almost 100,000 lives. And on top of that, we're talking millions of jobs are lost. And this is a huge economic damage of the coronavirus so far. And this is not even including what's going to happen to people who lose their jobs, people who become depressed, commit suicide, alcohol-related deaths. All these other things are things won't be able to count until years down the road. So it is really major, this damage that the coronavirus is doing, not just on an economic scale, but on a human scale too. And a lot of it, of course, we talked about this the last 2 days. It's kind of a lot of the blame game is going on. Like they're blaming China because there's no transparency, late information about the outbreak, or silencing whistleblowers. There's this one interesting stat done by the University of Birmingham. And this research was done, and this research is how much death could we have stopped, or how many infections could we have stopped if China acted 3 weeks earlier? Okay, so this is the study done by the University of Birmingham, and they said if China actually acted 3 weeks earlier, this study says that 95% of the infections would have been preventable. 95%. Which means if we're just looking at like 1.5 million cases right now, what's 95%? That's like 1.35, even more. It's almost 1.4 million. Which means that we would be roughly at around 100,000, 150,000 right now. Can you imagine that? If they were just 3 weeks earlier, if they didn't hold anything back, there would have been 95% of the infections would have been preventable. So that's pretty crazy. And other news related to China, everyone knows that Zoom, Zoom is that application or that computer platform where you can have meetings and you get to see each other. I'm using it for my interviews for the Sunday edition, right? And this is an American-based company, but the CEO is Chinese and has ties to China. And recently, they found out there's so many privacy flaws, right? The security is really bad. It's weak. And what's even more alarming is they found that the server for Zoom is in Beijing. And because they have all these meetings that are saved like in a cloud, in a cloud server, they found that many of the meetings, these meetings that people are having, these private meetings, you can search them on the internet because it's just on this cloud server, and the security is really bad. And the reason why it's getting so crazy right now is because originally they had 10 million people who were using Zoom, but because of the coronavirus and all this quarantine and this this lockdowns, it went from 10 million to 200 million users. And because of this, of course, many hackers are going to try to get people's information. And because many people countries have found out about Zoom, many companies and many governments have already banned Zoom. They're no longer on Zoom anymore. So, they're storing private encryption keys in China, and which is a total major security risks. So because there's too many privacy flaws, even investors are now suing Zoom because they lied about the strength of their security. So I hope that you guys too, if you're, obviously if you don't have anything very important, like on your meetings, nothing private, I suggest that Zoom is fine. Because if you don't mind, like other people all of a sudden finding out about Zoom, your Zoom meeting, like say if you're just talking with your friends, I don't think it's a big deal. But especially those who have like very important private calls or private things that you don't want anyone else to hear, definitely I would suggest to log out and delete Zoom from your phone and from your computers. The last thing I want to talk about is something super interesting. What's super interesting about this is, like in England, you know what's happening? People are vandalizing 5G towers and harassing 5G workers. So you're thinking like, what? Like, why would people in England be doing this? It's because there's tons of stuff on the internet. Because a lot of people are watching the internet now because they're at home all day. There are tons of things on the internet saying that coronavirus is a conspiracy because of 5G. So because of 5G gives off this radiation, and this radiation is causing people to get the coronavirus, and there's this it's a world cover-up on this. So it's like, where the heck, you think it's kind of ridiculous, right? That people are actually damaging towers and harassing 5G workers who have nothing to do with it because they're reading all these research or studies or people posting up things that 5G is the reason for the coronavirus. Now, a couple things we need to know is that people don't believe these crazy things, or it might not be crazy, but people don't start believing these things just because they're crazy. It always starts with something, like something true. And there are some things that are true. I was looking on the internet to see what research has been done. And some of the research does say that 5G gives out a new type of radiation that we haven't experienced before. And some researchers are saying that people have symptoms like headaches, fatigue, decrease in concentration, insomnia, irritability, and some researchers are actually asking for the delay of 5G to come in. So, a lot of concern from doctors about the electromagnetic radiation that comes from 5G and how it can affect your nervous system and how it can also affect your immune system or how it's linked to cause cancer. Okay? So, which means that the first thing I'm trying to tell you is people not going to believe in things just that's like out of the blue. There has to be some start to it. So, I was looking into it. There is research out there. There are some doctors that are talking about this, and there's some research that shows a link to cancer. Okay, so you got to know that. So the thing I want you to get into now is how not to get too into something when there's not enough information. So some of the things we need to know is, like, for instance, every single electronic thing you have, whether it's a cell phone, earphones, wireless anything, right? Basically, almost every electronic has radiation. Low frequency radiation, which is not high enough to cause any health problems. Okay? And low frequency radiation basically means it can't even penetrate your skin, which means it can't even get to your lungs, or it can't get to your organs, your healthy organs, or your vital organs. Now, there are some things that have high frequency that can penetrate your skin. For instance, like the sun. The sun has really high frequency and it will go through your skin, right? And there are other things like radio waves. Radio waves can go through your skin, but it's not harmful. So there are some things that can penetrate but are not harmful to you. Now, 5G uses something called millimeter wave tech, which is a higher frequency, which can possibly cause damage. And they say it's in between the sun and radio waves. Okay? Now, right now, scientific studies are being made for these radio frequencies, like for regular radio frequencies. So much of the research says that there's no link between cell phone radiation and cancer. That's so far the studies itself. But remember, 5G is a different type of radiation, right? So a couple of things that I researched that we need to debunk. Okay, one thing you need to know is that 5G is using a similar wavelength as 4G. And it's also, we also have 5G things that are used in airports and such too. And is higher frequency worse than lower frequency? Well, not all higher frequency is. And another thing is, this is not a mind control experiment. 5G is not a mind control experiment. So I hope people are not going that crazy. But there are some studies that say that there's a link to cancer. Actually, there's especially two studies that say that high levels of radiation will cause cancer. But the controversial thing about these two studies that talk about radiation and cancer is that the two mice that they used were exposed to such a high amount of radiation, more than any human would face. So that's controversial. And you have to think about this. Cell phones have been around forever now, right? Like, everyone's got them. If cell phones actually cause brain tumors and cancers, then think about this. For the decades that we've had like cell phones, if it's really causing cancer, there should be a massive increase in brain tumors or cancers because everyone's using cell phones. But when you look at the research, there's no real big difference since cell phones were introduced. Right? So that's something you have to think about, is if it was really causing these things to happen, there should be some type of increase while everyone is using these cell phones, but there isn't. So we got to kind of realize that for 50 years already, people are being exposed to these types of frequencies. And there are thousands and thousands of research that is being done, but the vast majority of them are saying that there is not really big damage that comes from cell phones and these radio waves right now. And the thing that we do need to look into is research and good science, and not just basing it on like 1 or 2 studies or even 10 or 15. Why? Because there's thousands of them. One thing that you know what a carcinogen is? A carcinogen is something that causes cancer. Okay, now they consider radio waves, or what cell phones give off, they call it a 2B carcinogen. The number 2 plus the letter B as in boy. Now, when you hear the word carcinogen, something that causes cancer, people freak out, right? But do you know 2B carcinogens includes pickles and coffee and cell phone radiation, which means that it's not in a very harmful area yet, right? So I hope that all of us too, now that we're on the internet more, there are going to be some crazy things, fake news, or news that quite isn't backed up by research yet. So if you do fall upon this 5G causing cancer, please look at it carefully, look at who wrote it, and also understand that some of this can be a little bit unproven, right? So I hope that you guys learned a lot from this today too, and we're going to move on to our praise section. And in our praise section today, I hope you guys can sing along too. The first song is going to be History of the Lord and the Holy Spirit. And what does it say? This song says to take action boldly and fearlessly. Why? Because God is going to act and be with you. And the second song is going to be Love, Forgiveness, and Mercy. So let us praise the Lord together.
Every day you must act fearlessly, boldly. You must shall last eternally. Here the wedding feast has begun. Now offer up glory to our God and to the Holy Spirit evermore. Now offer up glory to our God and to the Holy Spirit All God has made, heaven and earth, humankind, in His perfect love, God created them. Our God is love, He forgives, He's merciful.
God, He gives heaven's word once again today.
The Holy Spirit moves our hearts once again today.
We are saved by the Lord once again today. Even though you have fallen short, they will make up for what you lack. Train your heart, live with love, mercy and grace. Live like this, live with love, rapture each day, like a God Spirit Son. Make your heart white as the skies, high as heaven, with love and grace. Up above, they rule with love over this whole world. Even though you have fallen short, they will make up for what you lack. Train your heart, live with love, mercy and grace. Live like this, live with love, rapture
And that was Love, Forgiveness, and Mercy. And the first song was History of the Lord and the Holy Spirit. I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that. There's so much left today, especially when we're talking about the Word. And this is something a little bit different I wanted to talk about because this is kind of like a new direction that we're kind of receiving. I'm sure that a lot of you heard Pastor Joan talk about this too, is about like the direction of ministry. And it's really cool because it kind of follows what's happening with the coronavirus, as in how transparency is so important that, people should know, what they're getting into. And it's about transparency in our ministry efforts and not hiding anything. And, a lot of people will sometimes say, hey, why are you hiding things? Well, if you're hiding something, you only hide if you have something bad. And the answer is, it's not actually that true. Right? People don't hide things only because it's bad. Sometimes people hide things because that person is not ready to hear it. For instance, a child who is adopted. When are you going to tell them? And for a while, you're going to hide it from them because you're more concerned about their side. So people don't just hide it because there's something to hide, there's something bad. It's because sometimes the other side is not ready to hear it. And also because the situation, circumstance is not that great. I'll give you an example. Is there a time to hide when it comes to faith and religion? Because I know that a lot of people in churches will say things like, come on, you can't be ashamed of your faith. Because the scriptures tell us, don't be ashamed of your faith, but be bold, right? But, in all honesty, Christianity already went through that in the very beginning of their history too. In the beginning, after Jesus died, he was persecuted, put to death. And then after that, there was like this great Roman persecution for like almost 400 years. And during that time, Christians had to hide underground. They had to have services in small groups because they couldn't gather too large, or else they'd be caught and then taken to the Roman Colosseum to be killed. And we're talking millions of people died in those 400 years. So even at that time, yeah, they if you look at Christianity too, there was a point when there had to be hiding. And it wasn't because they're ashamed. It's just because people don't want to die, right? And that's something completely different. So I do believe there is a time for everything. And even when it comes to any religion or any type of faith or any church or whatever it is, there's a time to hide, and there's going to be a time for things to come out into the open. And it does feel like this is a time that the Holy Spirit's kind of inspiring through Pastor Joan, that this is a time for us to be more transparent. And let me just tell you a couple things of why this is a good idea and what the eventual result is going to be. Okay? So on the two things, why is it a good idea? What's the eventual result going to be? So first thing is, you have to understand is right now, because like the cultural hub of the world where people are always looking towards is usually America. So things that go well in America, trends and fashion trend or whatever it is, trends that are there, fads that are there, usually go to other countries too. So to understand this, in America, in the 1960s and 70s, this is when mainline Protestantism started to decline, and spirituality and new movements became very popular. And some of the things that came up during that time, like some things were part of Christianity. There was also Scientology started, witchcraft, Wicca started, Hare Krishna started, Unification Church all started, and these all began during the 60s and 70s. It was just a really big movement that happened for new religious movements to come out. Now, what happens is, if you look at all these things that are here, besides Wicca and maybe the Unification Church, but Hare Krishna and Scientology, we had even if you look at the Mormon Church right now and Jehovah's Witnesses, these are all churches or religions that people were looking at as cults. But if you look at them all today, we still might think of them as kind of weird, but they're very accepted. And they say that it usually takes about 50 to 100 years for some new religious movement to establish as a religion. So the one cool thing about us is we're at 42 years, right? So they say it's usually about 2 to 3 generations. A generation is about 15 years. Generation is about 30 years, right? So we're already past one generation, moving into the second generation. It says it takes about 2 to 3 generations. And the reason it takes that long, because in order for that movement to be accepted, it has to be able to maintain itself, because a lot of these movements kind of die off, and they don't legitimize. They don't become a government entity. They don't legitimize. They're not growing. They don't last for that long. But when you look at, like, even Scientology is like based off of like a fictional book, right? It's based on a science fiction book, and yet it stood the test of time over the last 40 to 50 years. And even though people still look at it as kind of weird, but still is accepted. Like, no one's like going, oh my gosh, like, look at this sign. No, think about, like, you have Tom Cruise, you know, who's that other actor? Kelly Preston's husband. What's his name? John Travolta. So you have even these very, very famous people going into these religions. Like, even the Mormon church, you know, 50% of Christians still think of the Mormon church as a cult, but no one bothers them. Like, no one's writing stuff against them. No one's sitting there like, oh my gosh, stay away from there. So one thing you have to understand is eventually the old and the new churches, like, this is what the actual realization people are going to have. Eventually people are going to realize that when you look at old and new churches, like, or say new movements, they're not really that far apart. Why? Because, you know, we look at these new churches or new movements, and they'll even look at us and say, that is so weird. How come you talk about this and you say this? That is so weird, right? What a weird doctrine. But if you really think about it, even Catholicism started with transubstantiation, which basically means that when you ate the bread and drank the wine, in the past, we literally thought that when you put the bread into your mouth, it literally turned into Jesus's flesh. Tell me that's weird. That's weird, right? Or then you drank the wine, it literally turns into Jesus's blood. Like, we actually used to believe that. That's weird, don't you think? Or even in Buddhism, it's just as weird as like reincarnation, that you come back as an animal or something. So if we look at these other like new movements or new religions, in the beginning people think it's weird, but eventually people realize it's not that weird. Actually, all religions have some type of weird thinking or some type of thing that's not normal. So people understand this, and as we mature and grow and realize that churches or religious movements we considered as cults, like Mormons, Jehovah's Witness, Scientology, even Hare Krishna, like all these things, they just become readily acceptable. And right now, no one bothers them. And even though they have their own Bible, even though they don't believe in Jesus, no one cares. Right? So when you think about it, just the curve of a religion is basically you start off small, fanatical devotion, right? And, you know, of course, think about this. Fanatical devotion is also subjective too. And they have, at one point in most religions, at some point, they have a living leader who is either worshipped or held as some high prophet, like Gandhi, Confucius, right? Many people have these very, very high, and they were living at a certain time. They might not be living anymore, but they were. So they all go through this exact same curve. And part of it is as they grow bigger and bigger, they generally are just considered respectable, and they're socially accepted. And when they become big enough, then everyone has to accommodate you, right? Then you actually become a religion, and you're no longer a cult at that point. And we have to realize is that for us too, going in this direction, I'm going to tell you what the biggest benefits of being established is. When you're not hiding who you are, or you can't say things to people about what you really believe in, it's very hard to gain pride in this history or in what you believe in, because you can't say it to anyone. It's hard to have pride when you have to hide it, and you have to make sure that no one knows, right? And it's very hard to gain energy from your faith when you feel like you won't be accepted if you tell people who you really are, right? Which means that the sooner we do this, the bigger the benefits for the future of this history, right? Even if you look at even like Judaism and Christianity, just everyone all together, even us, you know, Christianity, everyone knows the punchline. Jesus is the Messiah. Nothing's hidden. Everything's in the open, and it's very open. Jesus is the Messiah, Jesus is the Messiah. You don't even have to explain it. Everyone already knows whether you're Christian or not. All the doctrine is online. Everything is there. It's very, very transparent. You don't have to explain anything to anyone. You just are who you are. It's a very, and this is something that's very good, because the benefit of it is people will be able to gain that boldness and pride in who we are, right? It is a bold and great direction for all of us to really consider and know that we're moving in that direction is a great sign. And it seems that this is the time the Holy Spirit's inspiring us to move in that direction, and I'm all for it. And I think it's time, in other words, to say it's time to come out of the catacombs, right? It's time to be open about it. And the sooner we're open, yes, it's going to be hard in the beginning. Yes, people are going to say bad things in the beginning. But it's the same with any other movement that has been here in the past, even those that we consider to be wrong. Like we just talked about it, right? Hare Krishna, Unification Church, Scientology, right? All these different places. We were like, what the heck? But even they went through that entire step. They've withstood the test of time. They're growing, and now they're established, and even more being established. Because they're now established, like governments and people have to accommodate them. They're now an official religion, and no one can really say anything against them. So I do think that this is a great direction. I hope that everyone is looking forward to it. I know it's a little bit scary. It's always going to be. But I do think more than anything else, this time of, I really feel it's going to move very fast too, because Pastor Jones already talked about it 3 times already. And just recently she talked about it again. And I think now it's time for all of us to really consider, is this, there's nothing about shame. But being open will bring pride. Great pride in this history and who we truly are. And it might be hard, but for the future's sake, it is going to be one of the greatest benefits, right? So I want to play this. It's time for me to give my song of the day. And I'm picking a song that comes from the 90s, early 90s, from a hard rock supergroup. Okay, they're American. They're from Los Angeles, and the group is called Mr. Big. It used to be one of my favorite songs. It came out during a time when all these rock ballads came out, like More Than Words by Extreme and such. But this group, they sang this song that became so popular. It's called "To Be With You," and it's perfect because it doesn't matter. Just to be with God, to be in this history with the Lord, nothing matters, even if people come against us. So we're gonna listen to the song. It's going to be from Mr. Big, "To Be With You."
Hold on, little girl. Show me what he's done to you. Stand up, little girl. A broken heart can't be that bad when it's through. It's through. Fate would twist of both of you. So come on, baby. Come on over. Let me be the one to show you. I'm the one who wants to be with you. Deep inside, I hope you'll feel it too. Feel it too. Waited on a line of waited on a line just to be the next to be with you. Build up your confidence so you can be on top for once. Wake up, who cares about little boys that talk too much? I've seen it all go down. The game of love was all rain down. So come on, baby, come on over. Let me be the one to hold you. I'm the one, yeah. Deep inside, I hope you'll feel it too. Feel it too. Waited on a line of waited on a line, yeah, just to be the next to be with you. Why be alone when we can be together, baby? You can make my life worthwhile. I can make you start to smile. When
And that was Mr. Big, To Be With You. I hope you enjoyed that song. It brings back awesome memories for me because that was me in high school at that time. No, 293 and 4 and 5. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that was my that was middle school for me. Well, I guess it would be middle school for me because well, for Americans, but it's not middle school. It's actually high school for me. High school in Canada is 5 years, so I was a freshman at that time. Wow. So that was Mr. Big, To Be With You. I hope you really enjoyed that. Which brings us to the part of the show I really enjoyed this week especially, which is a time of Thanksgiving, right? So this is a story that I got from someone in Malaysia. Her name is Sue Chi, and she told me this really, really cool story. And basically what happens was, like, this is actually, it's cool and it's shocking because you're like, whoa, like, how did that happen? But she said she was on the bus and her stop comes, and then the doors open and she comes out and, you know, she walks out. And then across the street from her, there's a friend she knows. And the friend is like waving, like, hey. And she's like, oh. And you know when you're like focused on something, you don't see something else? And when she saw her friend, she didn't bother to look at what was coming on the street of any cars. And she waved and she starts walking to cross the street. And at that moment, there's a lorry, like a big truck, like coming straight by, and she didn't see it. But the amazing thing was, she said someone grabbed her and pulled her back, and the lorry just went by her so close to her face. And she was so stunned and shocked at that moment. But when she looked back, there was no one there. And I was really inspired by this, that, wow, like, there wasn't anyone there, but someone pulled her back. And this is one of those stories. She was telling me she's so thankful to God that He saved her at that time. And without her being saved, how could she be here? And I know that this probably inspires some of us too to really think about, oh wow, you know, I should be very thankful too. Oh, what are these stories that I have? And sometimes the stories may not be like you almost died, but they can be things where you realize later on, wow, if I came earlier, this would have happened. Oh my gosh, if this, oh, I didn't know that. Talk to your parents. Your parents might have a story, or your grandparents might have a story of almost being dead or dying, right? Because think about this. If your parents almost died before you were born, you would never be here. Talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, and I know there's plenty of stories out there. You know, this kind of, I'm not going to give you a Thanksgiving story because this is kind of a not a very, very good Thanksgiving story, but this is one that I remember because from Suchi's story, the most interesting, the funny part about it that for me is that she said that when she saw her friend across the street, you know, she's not paying attention to anything else. She's only looking at her friend, and she's ready to cross the street, and she has no idea a car's coming. You know, one time for me too, this is kind of a funny story for me, is it's funny because I just started to drive. So I'm like 16 years old at this time. In Canada, you have to be 16 to get a license. So just became 16, driving my parents' car around. I'm like, wow, I'm so cool. So I thought to myself, it's so sunny outside, I got to go buy some sunglasses. So you know where I got my sunglasses? I stopped by 7-Eleven and I bought these like $6 sunglasses, okay? $6. So I'm like, yeah, right? No one's gonna notice like these sunglasses being so cheap. So I put on the sunglasses. I'm like, oh, these are cool. So I get into my car with these sunglasses, and as I'm driving, I'm checking myself out in the rear view mirror. I'm looking like to the left, right, like, man, I think I'm cool because of these sunglasses. Remember, I'm 16 years old at this time. So as I'm checking myself in the mirror, I hit the car in front of me. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. So, you know, that's my funny story of the day. 16 years old, just started driving, got into a car accident because I was checking myself out with $6 sunglasses from 7-Eleven. Go figure. This is what people are like when they're students, right? So that brings us to the end of today's podcast. I am so grateful that you joined us here on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. It is the end of the weekend, which means what? This Sunday, the Sunday edition, guess who we're meeting? We are meeting the Sumney Boys for the interview, so I hope you guys will just really get yourselves ready to this fun interview. All right, everyone, take care and have a wonderful weekend.
Have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure.
You wanna make it happen? Don't ever back down from the challenge.